I'm excited to be able to teach you about microgreens today. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
There, I gotcha. I had to find the right button.
Yeah.
Okay. So at least you can kind of see a little.
Mm-hmm. I can.
And I can open this back up.
Yeah, there you go. Do you know how off that clock is?
I am looking. Oh, no, it's not. They fixed it. It was really off yesterday.
Okay, like so that's the correct time.
It is 4 minutes after, and I'm just gonna check. Okay, so we have 6 of us. I think you could probably start, and if anyone has questions because they missed the very beginning, we can always ask at the end.
Okay.
And I have your instructions that I can send out to everyone later.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you everyone for coming to this Zoom presentation on growing microgreens. My name's Deb Denzer. I am the owner of business called Terra Sol Gardens. I have been growing plants now for well over probably 30 years, maybe 40 years. I grow annuals and perennials and vegetables and microgreens, but the business is primarily focused on microgreens. The annuals and perennials I grow for Kohler Company because that's my full-time job. So the Terra Sol Gardens is just a part-time business for me. I supply microgreens to some of the local restaurants, Paradigm, Goodside Grocery, Woodlake Market, Black Wolf Run, the Blind Horse, and the Paddock Club. And then I have just a handful of individual customers who I supply microgreens to as well. So microgreens are plants that are grown on the surface of the soil to the cotyledon stage or just past the cotyledon stage. And just so you understand what a cotyledon is, a cotyledon are the very first leaves that you see growing after a seed germinates. They're the very, very first set of leaves that you see. And then the true leaves come after the cotyledons. And typically cotyledons will yellow and fall off. So in the case of microgreens, it's approximately a 2-week seed to harvest time frame. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer depending on the crop that you're growing. But it's an easy fresh source of vegetables to have, and you can certainly do it in your home. You don't need any special equipment. You don't need any special lighting, only because you're just growing them for such a short period of time. You're not growing them to flower or to produce seeds, so they don't have all those high light requirements that most plants would typically have to produce those flowers and to produce those seeds. The differences between microgreens and sprouts are that microgreens, again, are grown on the surface of the soil. They require the soil and some moisture to germinate. Sprouts, on the other hand, are grown in an enclosed environment. Most people who do sprouts on their counters and in their homes put a massive quantity of seeds in a jar. They soak those seeds for 2 to 3 days, rinsing them in between each soaking. And then drain all of that water away and let those seeds germinate. And you're consuming in sprouts both the very top of the seeds, the seed coat, and the roots. With microgreens, mostly it's just the cotyledons, the very tops of the plants, and there might be some seed coats in there, but not very many. I think from all the research that I've done on growing microgreens, that microgreens tend to be a little bit safer crop to grow, and you get a really nutrient-rich food. You don't have the problems that a lot of sprouts have with E. coli and salmonella because of the way that microgreens are grown compared to the way that sprouts are grown. The reason why sprouts have such high rates of E. coli and salmonella is because seed coats inherently are porous. They have little tiny microscopic holes in order for the water to get into the seed, under the seed coat, and to start those chemical processes for germination to happen. And the bacteria of E. coli and the bacteria of salmonella can be harbored in those seed coats. And then when you're sprouting, you're setting up an environment where there's a really high humidity level, lots of moisture in that jar, and seeds all by themselves produce a huge amount of heat. It's amazing how much heat seeds produce from the process of growing. So you've got those two factors that are the best habitat for E. coli and salmonella to grow exponentially. There are ways to treat seeds to try to reduce the amount of those bacteria on the seed coats. But again, my preference is that I don't like to use a lot of chemicals on my food, and I don't like to expose my food to a lot of chemicals. I like to try to grow things more organically whenever possible. I just want to minimize the impact of the chemicals that we have in the environment and around us all the time, every day, when I'm consuming my food. It doesn't mean I'm a purist, because I'm certainly not, but I just want to do the best that I can do for the food that I produce for other people to consume and to eat. So my practices are always to grow as organically as possible. With that, I brought some seeds along with me today. I brought some trays along with me. I brought some potting soil mix with me, and I brought a completed flat of microgreens that I've grown the last 2 weeks. And I'll show you how I seed and how I grow the microgreens so that you can hopefully duplicate this at home. You can use any kind of container that you want to use to grow microgreens. If you want something decorative, you can certainly use anything from a coffee cup to a mason jar to a plastic food container that you might get, a berry container you might get at the store. It's helpful to have some drainage holes, but not necessarily 100% necessary. You want to fill that container as close to the top of the container as possible with your soil, because it'll make it a lot easier to harvest your microgreens when you're ready to harvest them. And the drainage holes are helpful because then you can certainly water your seeds a lot more heavily, because the water then will escape that container. If you use something like a coffee cup, you want your soil to be moist, and then you can use like a spray bottle and just mist the seeds until they start germinating, and then just keep them moist until you're ready to harvest them. So there's all kinds of options and all kinds of choices for growing microgreens. In terms of soil, you can use any kind of potting mix. I have experimented with all different kinds of soil processes and soil types. I have decided on a potting mix, not Miracle Grow, not anything with the water holding gel crystals in it, not anything that's got fertilizer in it, because again, I want to go as organic as possible. I have just a general all-purpose potting mix that doesn't have any of those other ingredients added to it. It's a blend of perlite, which are the really tiny white specks that you see in the soil. It's got bark in it and sticks, so you'll see some of those things in the soil as well, and peat moss, and that's what it is. Perlite is a naturally occurring mineral. It's a volcanic mineral. Peat moss is natural and bark is natural. So there's really nothing added into this mix. I have used rice hulls and have found that I need to be really careful with the rice hulls when I buy them. I need to make sure that my rice hulls are 100% organic. I had a problem this past winter using some rice hulls that must have been treated with some sort of herbicide at some point, or maybe it was rice hulls that were genetically modified to allow farmers to spray those crops to keep them weed free, because I had about 2 months worth of no germination or poor germination, and I wasn't able to harvest anything off of those crops at all when I was growing on those rice hulls, which was an extremely costly lesson to learn. And I would have never thought about that as being a possibility. So lesson learned in that process, which gardening is nothing but a grand experiment anyways. I found over the years, some things work and some things don't. So you just keep trying and experimenting, and things that work, those are the techniques that you use, and plants that do well, those are the plants that you grow, and the ones that don't do well, or the techniques that don't give you the outcomes you want, then you don't use them. So it's a fun life to live and fun things to do with plants. I have 2 different kinds of trays that I use in my production. I have shallow trays, which are about maybe 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches deep. And I have deep trays that I use that are probably 2 inches deep. And I use those 2 types of trays for different crops that I'm growing. The shallow trays are for the crops like radish, carrots, carrot microgreens, arugula microgreens, kale microgreens, cabbage microgreens, most of the microgreens, broccoli, chives. What are some other things that I grow? Marigolds, any kind of mixes like a cress, watercress mix, those kinds of things. I usually use the shallow trays. The crops that I use the deep trays for would be sunflowers and wheatgrass. I will talk about the soil and filling these trays. I use a general garden scoop. This is the garden scoop that I use. And in all of my shallow trays, I will take 2 heaping scoops of soil. And I put them in the tray, put the soil in the tray. And then I will break up chunks and I'll smooth out the soil on the surface of the tray. Can everybody see this okay? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So I'll level out the soil on the tray. I don't necessarily pat it down. And I want to make sure all the corners are filled in and all the edges are filled in. And there's a little bit of a gap between the level of the soil and the very top edge of the tray. So I have this little tiny dime here that I'm going to set. I'm hoping you can see that to give you some point of reference for the surface of the soil. And for a tray like this, for most of the crops, it's about 2 tablespoons worth of seeds, roughly. Some are 3, some are a little bit less, but on average, it's about 2 tablespoons worth of seed. I have gotten to a point where I use this sugar cup that used to have a lid that I got from Goodwill as my seed holding tool. And these are arugula seeds. I buy my seeds in big bulk sacks that look like this because I go through so many seeds over the course of a month that it's just much more economical for me to buy mass quantities of seed. So then I will lightly sprinkle the seeds on the surface of the soil. And for arugula, it likes a little bit more space in between the seeds. And to grow, one of the things that happens with microgreens is that you're setting up a microclimate where the plants are so close together when they're growing. There's lots of humidity on the surface of the soil because you're keeping the soil pretty wet. And sometimes the plants, like, there's molds that can develop right at the surface of the soil. I mean, it's not uncommon for that to happen with plants anyway, especially in a greenhouse. And they tend to do what we call in the plant world, in the grower world, is damping off. So you'll see the plants literally just kind of melt right in the middle, and you can harvest and cut around that, but you want to leave that little patch that's kind of damped off and throw that away. So I put a dime on the surface of the soil here to show you hopefully the seeding rate of the arugula seed on the surface of the soil. So it's probably, if I was to measure the dime, it's probably 20 seeds that would fit on the head of the dime if it was there. So that's the arugula. Does anyone have any questions yet about this process? No? Okay. So the next thing I brought was wheatgrass. And again, that's in this deeper tray. My sunflowers and my wheatgrass go in the deep trays. For the wheatgrass, I put in 4 to 5 scoops of soil. Because I want that soil level to be really high. And the reason why I want it to be so high is because I want to give the roots room to grow for the wheatgrass and for the sunflowers. They have really large, extensive root systems. And I found that one of the limiting factors in plant growth is the amount of room the roots have to push. So if you grow any kind of plant in a really small container, its growth is going to be limited if the roots are so compacted in that container. It won't ever be able to reach its full mature height. And a lot of times when I'm playing with the soil levels and smoothing out, I'll find little tiny pieces of bark or big chunks of sticks in the particular soil mix that I'm using. And I pick those out just because I want the roots to not have to push through that or be interfered with as they're trying to grow. So the wheatgrass is seeded really densely compared to the arugula. I have all the seeds touching side by side. And again, I've been doing this for so long, I don't have an exact measurement. I used to weigh it out and it's about 12 ounces of seed per tray that I'm using for the wheatgrass. And little known fact, maybe, I'm not sure, wheatgrass is the same as catgrass. So if you have cats and you want to grow grass for your cats, all it is wheatgrass seeds. So same thing. Save yourself a couple bucks, grow your cats their own grass. So this is what the wheatgrass flat looks like after it has been seeded. Every once in a while, you might find some other seeds or some chaff that comes from the plants themselves in the wheatgrass seeds that you have, and just pick those out and let them grow. So once I've done that, I water all of this in. I don't cover the seeds with soil. I leave them just sit right on the surface of the soil and let them grow. And I water them daily. I water these seeds every day. If they dry out, you lose, the plants will die. If they've started pushing roots and they dry out, those roots will die and you won't be able to recover them. So I go in every morning into my greenhouse where I grow all of this stuff, and I water every single morning until the plants have germinated. And once they've germinated and they've started growing and pushing those cotyledons, that's when I kind of back off a little bit on the watering, because I find that it helps minimize the amount of damping off that happens in my greenhouse space. And the plants just do much, much, much better. So that's that. And then when you're ready to harvest, throw all of this down on the floor. When I harvest all the plants that I sell to the restaurants and the stores, I follow good agricultural practices. I use clean tools and I have gloves on all the time when I'm harvesting, just for safety reasons, for the safety of the people who are consuming the plants. This flat is ready to harvest. It has grown for 2 weeks. This is purple radish, high in just lots of vitamins, especially with that dark red color. It's going to be really high in anthocyanins, which are really good for your body. And I will take, I'll take my very fancy scissors that have a stand on them, so they just sit on the table. And I'll take a little handful of these. And I just cut them. So I'm leaving, I've got the stems intact here. I'm leaving the roots in place, and then I put them in my container. Maybe I should cut on this end because I'm thinking it's hard to see, right? Maybe. So you can see that here's where the soil is of this plant. These are the roots, the underside of the flat itself. You can see that these roots are just this huge white mass of roots. These plants would have a hard time growing to their full size. So again, I'm just cutting just above the surface of the soil when I'm harvesting these plants. And that's what I'm left with. And it's literally just grabbing handfuls of them and cutting as I go. So that's that. Does anyone have any questions yet? Do you care to share how what you're using to grow in?
It's okay to unmute your microphones, guys. It's okay. Does anybody want to show the container they picked?
Okay, I'll share. A friend of mine was growing microgreens, and she bought, I mean, you said we don't need to buy fancy things, but she was using this grow light as a wall thing. I thought it would be fun. She was, see if I can get it up here. All right, it's something you mount on the wall.
Okay.
It has a grow light, and so I started these last week.
Okay.
So there've been, let me see if I can show you. So I don't know, can you see that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so I've got one pot that had peas.
Yep.
And I'll have to look what I planted.
It looks like you've got maybe some cabbage, some peas. I could see the peas, and then the third one that's growing the best looks like it might be a broccoli or a radish. Some
yeah,
kind of
that's right.
cruciferous.
Yeah, I think one was a radish.
Okay.
And one was like a microgreen mix or something.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think I planted these about a week ago. So it's been fun watching them grow. Sorry, I don't want to make anybody dizzy here walking around my house. I'm sorry. But anyway, so I had questions. Does it, how many hours of daylight should you have for this stuff?
You know, when I first started growing microgreens, somebody had just asked me if I could grow sunflower microgreens. And I said, sure, I'll try it. And I had one of those, you know, those really cheap kind of like three-tiered, three-shelved plastic greenhouse things that have like a zipper plastic. You can pick them up at Menards or whatever. I had one of those that I was growing on, and I was able to fit 3 of these trays per shelf, and I had 3 shelves to work with. And I had it in my kitchen, which is a north-facing patio door. And that's all the light it ever got, especially in the winter time, which is probably, I think, what are the light hours in winters? The maximum is probably like 10 hours of light, 12 hours of light in the winter time. And they do just fine. They got a little stretched, but that's not a big deal because you're not looking for plants that are perfect. I would say you don't need to do more than 12, more than 16 is like amazing, but it's not necessary. And if you're finding that with using the grow lights, that it might be from an electricity standpoint, a little more money than you care to spend. I don't know how that's working for you. I was using just simple fluorescent tubes, nothing fancy, truly. And I didn't get the fluorescent tubes until I was a year into the process. So I grew these things in my kitchen for about 3 years before I moved into the greenhouse that I have now, which I rent the greenhouse space from a friend of mine. And that came with a whole host of other situations that I've had to navigate through and kind of figure out how to mitigate. Heat being one in the winter time. In a greenhouse, heat is like a crazy thing to have to manage, but it's one of the necessities. I can push the low temperatures to about, ideally, no lower than 62 to 65 degrees. Optimum growing temperature for microgreens is about 70. That is like the best. If I had the best of all worlds, 70 degrees every day, 365 days a year would be amazing. And then light, I think 10 to 12 hours is perfect. It's fine. You don't need to have much more than that. The plants will do just fine with that amount of light. And I don't supplement any lighting in the greenhouse at all in the wintertime. Whatever sunlight there is all that they get. They don't get any more than that.
Yeah, I appreciate your work as far as, you're growing for a lot of plants.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of doing it for, our home use.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of fun to have some pretty pots around and, just growing these things that people wonder, what is this?
What is it? And you can eat them and they taste amazing.
Yeah, so I've just started. This was the very first time I've planted. So, and then the things that you gave us in the bag, one, was it a soilless soil?
Yes, it's what I use in my production.
Okay. So it's soilless soil.
Yes. Yeah, well, anytime you buy bagged potting mix, anytime it's a potting mix, that's always classified as soilless mixture, always.
Oh, okay.
Because it has no actual soil particles in it. It's like peat moss, perlite, sometimes vermiculite, very often shredded bark. Sometimes they'll have the hydrogel in it to help hold moisture in your containers for the summer so you don't have to water quite as often. A lot of times it'll have a starter fertilizer, which is like, it's listed on a lot of bags of soilless mixture as blue chip. If you see blue chip on those bags, that is actually a starter fertilizer that just gives seeds as they're germinating that extra punch to grow a little bit faster. Okay. And then a lot of potting mixes too will have like a slow release fertilizer. I don't want any of that in my microgreens. I want just a really simple soilless mixture. That's maybe 3 compounds.
So like a bag of compost is not, that's soil then.
Compost is going to be, it'll have more soil-like properties, but it's still not soil. Soil is going to be made up of minerals like in Wisconsin, it'll be clay, it'll have some limestone, it'll have some, possibly some basalt or granite in it. It'll have some form of, hopefully, if you're lucky, some form of organic material mixed in it. It'll be full of bacteria, beneficial bacteria and beneficial microscopic organisms that all live together and do their thing to help plants take up nutrients, to help break down soil particles, to do all the things that we don't see on a regular basis because it's all done microscopically or it's all done chemically. So soil in of itself is its own thing, its own category, and it's something that literally you would have to dig out of your yard, from the earth. That's soil. Soilless mixtures are something that's made by people, and compost is just decomposed organic material that you put down in your gardens to help increase the beneficial bacteria, number one, to add some nutrients, number two, and help the plants take up those nutrient loads a little bit easier. That's really the function of a lot of the fungi and the bacteria that you find in the soil, is to allow those nutrients to be taken up by the roots of the plants. So I hope that answers your question, and it's probably a lot deeper.
I didn't realize it was that complicated. I mean, it's interesting, so.
Well, I'm sorry, that's my geekiness.
That's all right. That's okay. So, yeah, thank you for the seeds then. Where do you recommend getting seeds from? I know you can get the little seed packets at the grocery store or, Fleet Farm and everything, but is there an in-between? I mean, I don't want to buy 20 pounds of seed, but is there some place to get like, a little bigger quantity than those little seed packets?
There are some seed companies that do sell like 1 pound bags. Does the seed library have anything that might help?
We have smaller packets.
Okay.
So I think we ask that you don't take more than 6 per visit.
Okay.
But we
Okay.
keep an inventory and we try to replenish it.
Okay.
And of course, if you're able to collect seeds and donate them back, that's even better.
Yeah.
So we can keep replenishing it. But yes, the seed library would be a great way to start, and that's free. All we ask is that you write down what you're checking out and turn it into the second floor desk.
Mhm.
That's just so we can keep an accurate inventory, so we know what we have.
Mhm. Another place is a company called Todd's Seeds. They're out of Michigan. And then another company is Mountain Valley Seeds. Johnny's Seeds also carries larger quantities of seeds for growing microgreens.
What was that last one you said?
Johnny's Seeds.
Johnny's, okay.
Mm-hmm. Giving away my trade secrets. Or you can message me at Terra Sol Gardens. I've been contemplating that as an option, so.
Okay, so once you have planted the seeds and they are growing, then what's the best way to water them? Do you just water them across the top, or should you just?
That's a great question. So I used to do a lot of top watering because that's all I had. And I found that what that does is it increases the humidity. So if you look at, like, if you can see this tray, it's very dense. I mean, there's a lot of plants in there. And it's usually these center areas where that stay the most humid. And that's where the most problems start to develop, is right in the middle of the trays. So I've actually started bottom watering. Once the plants have germinated and they've started pushing up, I might water them for a few more days from the top, and then I'll move them from racks that I grow on into trays that hold water that are really intended for hydroponics growing. I haven't done anything with the hydroponics, so I just will fill those trays with water, and then the soilless mixture and the roots of the plants can wick up the moisture from the bottom and keep those plants hydrated. I found that I have a lot less issues doing that than I do top watering. But if you have a container that doesn't have any drainage holes, then you're gonna have to water from the top. Maybe just don't seed quite as densely in those containers as you might be able to seed in one that's got holes in it.
So a note from Kayla and Allison, they said that they tend to keep containers from restaurants that are reusable. They found that the noodle containers come in two sizes, and they put the shallower in the deeper and use a hot pin to put drainage holes in it. And the ridge in the container is about a dime depth down.
Very nice. That is super awesome. Repurposing. I love repurposing. Definitely. I repurpose all my trays. I will keep reusing them over and over and over again until they break down to the point where I can't use them anymore. But I do wash all of my containers, all my flats. After they've been used once, I wash them in just soapy water to kill any possible bad bacteria that might be harbored underneath the soil, or if some of the roots have started not doing so well. You can see that when you tip the plants upside down and you see the undersides of the plants, you can see dead zones usually, if there are any. And so when I see those kinds of things, then I think there's probably some virus or some bacteria that might be on the flats themselves. And washing with soap helps kill that. And it has to do with the pH of the soap. So organisms have a really narrow range of pH that they like to be in, and the soap shifts that pH range to the point where they don't survive. So it's a great way to sterilize the trays. If you want to go even stronger than that, you can use bleach by all means, or hydrogen peroxide, or any of those. Antibacterial things work great. But just basic soap is an antibacterial, so.
Would vinegar also work?
Vinegar would also work. Yep. Yep. Any other questions or sharing?
We have a shy audience. It's okay.
It is okay. It is okay to be shy. I understand. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Deb.
Yeah, and I hope that you're able to take away some new knowledge and some new information. I don't have a website, but I have a Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, you can certainly contact me through Facebook. I do check my Facebook page on a regular basis. And you can even message me through Facebook, and I do check those messages as well. So if you have any additional questions, or if you think you would like to try some seeds that I might have available in my greenhouse, send me a message. And I'll do my best to accommodate your needs and answer your questions. So thank you very much. I appreciate you coming today and taking the time out to spend with me. That was really awesome. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This was fun.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. Thanks.